Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today with discussions with the scientists at the Miami Project to Cure Paralysis. My name is Dalton Dietrich, and I'm the scientific director of the Miami Project, and today we have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Coleen Atkins, who's the associate professor in the Department of Neurological Surgery and a very important member of the Miami Project to Cure Paralysis. Thank you for joining us today, Coleen.
Thanks, Dalton, for having me.
Very good, very good. So Coleen is really doing a lot of exciting work in the area of traumatic brain injury. And of course, if you're reading the paper, traumatic brain injury is a really important problem. So Coleen, can you tell us some of the work that you're doing in TBI?
You're right. This is a really important question because we have no therapeutics that we can give to people who have traumatic brain injury to improve their cognitive functioning. And as many as 80% of people who have a traumatic brain injury have long-term problems with learning and memory. We're testing two new therapeutics, one with a small biotech company, and this is a drug that they're repurposing from Alzheimer's disease that we're testing in traumatic brain injury. And excitingly, we have found in our animal studies, when we wait even 3 months after the traumatic brain injury, their learning and memory functioning is improved with this drug. The other drug we're testing is a drug that is targeting the alpha-7 nicotinic acetylcholine receptor. This receptor is an important target for Alzheimer's disease as well. In fact, Aricept, the drug that's on the market right now for Alzheimer's disease, targets this receptor. And we're going after it in a slightly different way. We have a drug that will actually modify the receptor itself. And this then activates the receptor when the person is undergoing learning and memory to then potentiate that receptor's function and improve their learning and memory. And this drug as well is being developed by our lab as well as the chemist, our collaborator at UC Irvine, Dr. Kelvin Gee. So there are, I think, a couple of very promising therapeutics out there in the preclinical stages to try to treat learning and memory for chronic TBI survivors.
I guess what you talked about is learning and memory and cognitive decline. And I think it's important just to emphasize to the listeners today that one of the major clinical problems associated with mild, moderate, and severe traumatic brain injury is cognitive dysfunction.
Absolutely. In fact, you can find cognitive dysfunction across all injury severities. What's really interesting is why do people who have a mild TBI oftentimes have a long-term learning and memory problem? And we're trying to start to look at the variables that might underlie that. What are the underlying risk factors? One of the factors we've discovered is stress. So if you've encountered chronic stress in your life prior to sustaining a mild or TBI or concussion, that can also lead to persistent learning and memory deficits. And we have a collaboration here at the University of Miami with Dr. Robert Keene, where we're looking at the inflammasome, which is an inflammatory signaling molecule in the brain. And we have found that to be upregulated in the brain in animals that have had early life stress and then a mild TBI or concussion. And there's some exciting therapeutics on them that are being developed by biotech companies as well as here at the University of Miami that can target that inflammasome and then improve recovery.
And that's important, what you just talked about in terms of early stress, in terms of military personnel, that they come back after being in wars, blast injuries, things of this nature, with signs of PTSD. So this fits into that concept of actually TBI leading to these very complicated post-traumatic stress disorders that we're trying to target.
Absolutely. There have been a number of studies that have been funded by the DoD as well as the NIH that have looked at stress encountered right at the time of the traumatic brain injury, and those have found to worsen recovery after traumatic brain injury. Our study is a little bit different. We're trying to look at it in the context of early development. Childhood stress, such as neglect and abuse, is a huge problem in the United States as well as across the world. And this is a significant problem that leads to chronic persistent problems that emerge in adulthood and middle age. So oftentimes people might seem to recover from this early childhood stress, but their immune system has been altered such that when they encounter a later immune challenge in adulthood, or in our case, a mild traumatic brain injury, their inflammatory response is potentiated.
So getting back to some of the other things that you talked about in terms of neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's, I mean, who thought that people that have traumatic brain injury have a high incidence of various neurodegenerative diseases, Parkinson's in some cases, Alzheimer's you talked about. other types of things that are associated with repetitive concussion you've mentioned. So why do people that have early traumatic brain injury, are they predisposed to these late occurring neurodegenerative diseases? And I think your lab is working on that as well.
Absolutely. Actually, this is in collaboration with you, full disclosure. We've been studying whether or not traumatic brain injury will lead to Alzheimer's disease-like pathology. So in the clinical literature, it's a bit controversial. Does a traumatic brain injury lead to Alzheimer's disease later on as someone ages? And I would say the consensus in the field right now is probably not. Traumatic brain injury will lead to very similar pathologies in the brain that also occur in Alzheimer's disease. And these are key pathologies such as beta amyloid plaques within the brain, as well as tau hyperphosphorylation and tangles. And these are pathological changes in the brain in Alzheimer's disease. And we have found in traumatic brain injury that they are also upregulated, but in a slightly different areas of the brain, as well as differently expressed temporally in the injury model that we study. And what we have been looking at is whether or not in Alzheimer's disease mouse models, whether or not when they are pre-symptomatic, if a traumatic brain injury will then accelerate as Alzheimer's disease-like pathology. And indeed, we have found this in a couple different mouse models of Alzheimer's disease, that Alzheimer's disease-like pathology, well, we're not going to say Alzheimer's disease per se, but the pathology is actually accelerated as are cognitive deficits. We think that there's definitely an interaction going on there with the Alzheimer's disease genes that create the disease, as well as the TBI. But it's really still a very interesting question. What is the underlying cognitive deficits? And the reason why I bring this up is because in the Alzheimer's disease field, it's been a challenge to try to prevent the cognitive problems of Alzheimer's disease. So a lot of companies have gone after beta amyloid plaques and try to attack those plaques with antibodies or drugs. And although they can clear out the plaques, they can't rescue learning and memory. They can't improve the cognitive functioning. So a new area of research in Alzheimer's disease, which we're also going after in our TBI studies, is synaptic loss, the connections between neurons, because that actually seems to precede beta amyloid plaques and tau hyperphosphorylation and aggregation. And we have seen that traumatic brain injury in Alzheimer's disease mouse models will lead to persistent synaptic loss. And we think that that might be the underlying mechanism of the learning and memory deficits and the cognitive decline after traumatic brain injury.
Very, very interesting, very important. The number of concussions that we read about is just increasing, and therefore the possibility that a mild head injury early in life could affect the way you age is extremely important. So congratulations on all the work you're doing, not only trying to understand the mechanisms, but also testing new therapies and working with biotech to actually move those forward. Now, in addition to having a very active laboratory with graduate students, postdocs, and other individuals, you're also the director of our University of Miami graduate program in neurosciences. So tell us exactly what that involves. I know it's a big, big responsibility, and it keeps you very busy.
It has been an honor to serve the University of Miami as the Neuroscience Graduate Program Director. So we run a program that has around 30 to 40 graduate students yearly. We accept around 10 to 15 students a year. And these students get to rotate and research in over 70 different laboratories across the University of Miami. And the Neuroscience Graduate Program isn't in a department. It's actually encompasses all of the University of Miami, because neuroscience actually is a field that spans from genetics to biology to even on our marine campus, we have neuroscience graduate faculty. And so what I do as the Neuroscience Graduate Program Director is try to foster these graduate students across all these different campuses, the Gables campus, the Marine campus, and the Miller School of Medicine campus, to help them learn cutting edge technologies, to ask questions that are of key importance to our society today, and then to help them develop a career trajectory so that they can continue on with their science after they graduate and contribute to the neuroscience community.
Yeah. So the next generation of scientists working on problems that we're not going to be able to solve in our lifetime, but obviously they can continue. That's fantastic. So, okay, so science, running a research laboratory, being a very important person in terms of education, the next generation of scientists. And then here comes COVID-19 and exactly affecting us in terms of having to do personal distancing and remotely teaching. So how is that working for you? How is that complicating the ability to reach out to students and do the teaching or do your science?
Oh, thanks for asking that. It has been a challenge. You can see I'm in my backyard. I have 2 children at home and as well as a husband, and we all are trying to figure out how to navigate work, school, as well as coexist together, as well as trying to manage my laboratory and also trying to make sure that the graduate students in my graduate program are connected and actually still progressing, even though they've been disrupted with the COVID-19 crisis. What I can say is that there are a lot of tools and there are a lot of tools and there are a lot of support out there at the University of Miami as well as within the scientific community. And I encourage all of us to take advantage of them. So on a regular basis, we reach out to our graduate students, check in with them, make sure that they're doing okay. We have a lot of support for them. So we have emergency funds to give to them if they need it. We have mindfulness strategy techniques that we share with them. We have coping strategies that we share with them. And just touching base on a regular basis is important to keep that communication going. And these online technologies like Zoom or Microsoft Teams or Slack, they're just a great way to keep on doing that. In terms of my own laboratory, well, I've had a couple of papers that have been on the back burner. We've been just going straight forward, trying to do animal studies with our Alzheimer's disease mouse models as well as our stress studies. And maybe this is a good time to take a pause and actually just try to really write and get those papers out. So that's actually what my laboratory is really doing. One person who's working basically full-time on writing manuscripts, and another person in my laboratory is really working hard to make sure that when the laboratory starts to open up, we can hit the ground running, that all of our data is organized, collated, and that we can actually right off the bat know exactly what we need to do to push our science forward. So there's a lot of ways to try to keep your science going forward, even if you have to work at home or you have to find other ways to try to get your research done. The other thing that I really encourage all of us to do, and this is what my laboratory is also trying to do, is try to complete your science in other ways. There's a lot of research out there in neuroscience that actually is done not at the bench, but at the computer. Bioinformatics is a burgeoning field in the area of neuroscience. Trying to understand at a quantitative level the nervous system is a really important question that our graduate students are actually starting to work on. And there are a lot of bioinformatics tools that our students can utilize online to start to ask important scientific questions. And those are just as important as working at the bench. So there's a lot of strategies. So I'm just trying to hang in there as best as I can with my family. I'm just grateful that we're healthy. And I hope that you're healthy as well as all of my community.
Thank you, Coleen. Yeah, some of the things that we're learning from this experience, we're going to actually be able to use when we go back to work in the normal set. So I think it's actually going to help us be able to reach out to more people using these different types of Zoom processes and all the other stuff in video conferencing. So we're learning a lot from this experience, and I'm glad you're on top of the making sure the students are doing well. I personally, my graduate student training was one of the best times of my life, and it's really great to be able to have a director like yourself. It's so important to them. So anyway, Coleen, congratulations on all you're doing. Best of luck. Yes, stay safe, and we'll keep in touch and hope to see you soon.
All right, thank you for having me.